Thank you so much, Professor Echeverry, for your presentation. We'll now move into the panel discussion of the talk, and we're very excited to welcome Sandra Perdomo to join us to explore some key topics about biodiversity policy, but also about how AI can help us achieve biodiversity goals, which is one of the goals from our workshop, the one Hannah, me, and Anushka are organizing for this semester. We encourage all the participants here to ask questions in the chat. And time permitting, we'll answer what we can. I want to kick this discussion off with a question. But some of the things that you brought up, Alejandra, we, I'm in Bogota right now, and like there is a lot of discussion, particularly from local politicians, about the trade-offs between economic development and by the biodiversity goals. Particularly, there is this energy crisis coming up. It's like looming over us. There is no natural gas for 2025. Is one of the main energy generation in the country, but a lot of these natural gas projects are being halted by communities, either by different kinds of grievances, environmental and social. And I know it's very hard. It's a very hard question. It's a very hard crux to solve. But if there is any policy mix that we can create, or like from your framework, how can we understand and how can we switch on and off things to balance sustainable development? Like, you know, like we need to get people out of poverty. For that, we need energy, but we also we cannot, like, you know, set everything on fire or deforest everything. So yeah, I don't know. It's a hard question, but I will love your takes on it also for
That's a
Sandra.
good question, and I didn't even present anything on energy. And before grad school, I used to work as an environmental consultant in Colombia, mostly doing environmental impact assessment for energy projects. So I'll think about the answer thinking from that with using that hat. My sense is that Colombia, and this might be true for other Latin American countries, there's a lot of resistance from the local communities to projects that are imposed top down, right? So, for example, big dams that were happening, say like Ituango, things like that, the communities really resist when there's no free, prior, informed consent and all this stuff. And one thing I used to work for like small hydroelectric dams, and the small ones where the proponent was the community, there was a lot more buy-in, right? It was not big dams, right? It was small, like the scale was different, but maybe it might be, and this is all theoretical because I haven't been doing field work in a while, maybe we need a governance that is much more bottom up, interacting with those top down policies. So where the communities themselves say, what we want in our territory is this. So do they want solar? Do they want wind? Do they want, and if we had that in combination with the spatial prioritization happening at the national level, maybe there will be less resistance in the implementation. I'm sure all of this happens. I'm sure those of you doing field work, you know that you work with a community and you know what the community wants. So it's easier said from the academia than done. But I do think that what I've seen in my policy mix is that still very centralized. And that might be what is creating even more and more resistance by the local people. But you are actually a better person to answer that question. So we'll talk more about that. Thanks for the question.
Sandra, what about you from your perspective at Humboldt?
Yes, same here. We are not in the mood of this issue, but we have a lot of challenges, and also because we have a lot of work mainly in data collection, mainly in using AI in the local communities. We have a lot to do in terms of closing the gap between information and the goals to achieve all the framework of biodiversity, etc. So from this perspective, we are not working too much on these energies and these kind of things, but we are doing some research on those topics, of course, in terms of how, of course, in the way of the impacts of, for example, the sector of hydrocarbons can affect or no biodiversity. The different approaches to the sectors can affect or no biodiversity for the using of the sustainable kind of energies and these kind of things.
We have some interesting questions in the chat about related topics. In Colombia is an example of, has a lot of examples of like non-state actors. So there is like a state that we have, but we also have these like enclaves where like armed actors and other illegal activities happen. What is the role of biodiversity policies, or can enforce or nullify diversity policies, enhance these actors or like remove their power? Can you talk about like this interaction between these two things?
Yeah, I can try. So one thing is that we have all these national policies, and and this is like on paper. In theory, we have, say, a protected area that is, the different protected areas, right? But the implementation and how many resources go or funding goes to each one to do efficacy and like to law enforcement, that varies, right? So there are areas, if the territories are contested, for example, areas in the Amazon, areas in the Piedmont of the Caquetá Andes Amazon, where the resolution, for example, is not clear, and if there are contested overlapping governance or jurisdictions, actually what I've seen and learned is that then users take it to their advantage, because then they're like, well, 5 things apply to me, but none of them are clear. So then I do whatever I want with my land, for example. So areas where there's not clear distinction of, is this, a reserve or not? Is this indigenous land or park or border? These contested spaces are, easier to decide what to do as a landowner or something to, say, okay, I'm gonna burn this forest because I don't think I am a reserve. And so that's what we've seen in a lot of these particular edge borders of between ecosystems.
Okay. I have a question for Sandra. Sorry, Sandra. Given the scale of policies in Colombia, where everything is very national, what just Alejandra just said in her presentation, it is possible or desirable for environmental institutions such as Humboldt or elsewhere to pursue more granular, like working more with like communities, local communities, on a specific diversity policies. And if so, what are the enablers? And if not, what are the limitations of doing this?
Yes, absolutely. We have analyzed from the Institute about 160 policies in different sectors, not only in the environmental sector. And what we have found is that we have lack of information about territories. And if you see our systems, we have a system that we call Colombia, that is our biodiversity inventory of biodiversity of species of Colombia. We have collected about I don't know, more than 30 millions of registers of species of Colombia, and most of them are collected by participatory exercises with local communities. So what it means is this: we are trying to build this bridge of knowledge between people, local communities, to democratize all this information and empowering people, to be part of the process of protection, conservation, restoration, use sustainably the biodiversity, etc. So what we see is we have to close or more those policies that are national to local communities, because the diagnosis now is that biodiversity is not in the top of mind of everyone. It's a process that is increasing, is given more importance, but we have to work more with local communities, and I want to make some examples about what we are doing at this moment. One of them is a project that we have in Yaguara that we call Yaguara 2, that is a community, it's an indigenous community in the southeast of Colombia, very close to the Orinoquia that Alejandra was telling us about. And the first thing that I want to mention is the Institute has been like developing this social restoration of a territory, and we have contributed to this in a transition towards a curve of forestry development. And the project has included 25 families that are returned to these indigenous resguardos, that are these collective territories. And we have worked in about 420 hectares, developing plots, productive species, projects of conservation. We have signed like 48 conservation agreements to guide native species of this resguardo, highlighting the propagation of native species, and also making this link with the success of restoration processes. So the community is also being a protagonist in these biodiversity monitoring processes, which allow us to have a better knowledge of this territory. And also they give us many examples on how communities can use, for example, camera traps, sound recorders to monitor biodiversity. So they are learning by science, and also we are learning about their territories through those communities. So the examples of how we can involve communities in public policies are huge. The challenges are still huge. Another example that I can provide is in all these territories that were like victim of the conflict, we are using, for example, tourism of, ecotourism that Alejandra mentioned before, as a way of as a way of implement the peace agreement, because they were occupying all these guerrillas occupied the most biodiverse areas of Colombia. So they know very well these territories as well. So now in this legal life, now they carry out all these activities about nature of tourism. And also we can empower peasants and indigenous people that they know their territories better than many of the other researchers, that they are finding in nature tourism, bird watching, butterfly gardens, etc., activities like economic activities. And it is a good fight against illegal economies. Just to summarize some examples on how we can do this.
Yeah, thank you for your input there. So I'm going to kind of shift topics a little bit and go more on the data and AI side. As Yvonne mentioned, the environmental working group is really interested in developing these AI approaches for biodiversity conservation. And a big part of this is having access to adequate amounts of data that is of a good quality. So we were wondering, how developed is the data collection process for designing biodiversity policy mixes or monitoring wildlife? And if there are any gaps in data availability or accessibility that you've come across, especially when it comes to informing policy?
Yes, the first thing is to recognize the progress that Colombia has made in generating information on biodiversity. And in this case, the Humboldt Institute has made an important contribution. Currently, we have a series of tools. All of them are for public consultation, such as we call Biotablero, which presents data and indicators from official sources, which summarize the state and changes in Colombian biodiversity, and that also allow us like to see geographical consultations at different levels, different jurisdictions, departments, or even hydrographic subzones. There is also another tool that we have created that we call Biomodelos, which has information on species distribution. I mean, is about predatory behavior of species, basically in their territories. And additionally, Colombia is recognized for being one of the countries with a high commitment and result regarding the production and access to information. Indeed, the 6 national reports on that biodiversity issued by the Convention on Biodiversity in 2019 points out the important advances in biodiversity monitoring in terms of the review and the integration of biodiversity indicators, taking into account an interdisciplinary perspective and in accordance with the international standards. So this is the good things about the progress, but now, despite these advances, we're in the process of updating the biodiversity action plan that Colombia will present at COP16 next month. The Institute has been supporting the development of a monitoring and reporting component. And here we have been identifying some information gaps. So the first is there is no information on the effectiveness of participatory planning processes to avoid loss of natural ecosystems or biodiversity. Second, information of the loss of natural ecosystem is commonly associated with the loss of forests. So there is a lack of indicators for the transformation of non-forest ecosystem at the national level, as well as for continental or marine and island water ecosystems. Third, information on hectares restored or in the process of restoration does not yet have an unified report at the national level, since not all the actors or all the sectors that carry out the restoration process report to the Minister of Environment and our systems of information. So additional to that, the measure focus on continental terrestrial ecosystems. So there are no specific data for continental water or coastal marine ecosystems. And there is a lack of indicators to evaluate the effectiveness of restoration projects. Fourth, it is necessary to strengthen the indicators that help us to understand the role that other conservation data beyond those reported for our national system are fulfilling in Colombia. And this is necessary to evaluate the representativeness and effectiveness of area-based conservation measures in inland water ecosystems. Also, we have about 1,800 threatened species in Colombia. So this number will continue increasing as long as systematic evaluation of the risk of extinction of species cannot be carried out for Colombia. Extinction risk evaluation must be more agile, effective, and dynamic to be able to respond to information needs. 6, to understand the conservation status of a species, is very important to have population information. For some species, there are a conservation value. National parks, the institution who protect protected areas, has monitoring at the population level, as well as some NGOs that have a specific monitoring for particular species. However, this information is not available aggregated at a national level because the country requires an information system on population of wildlife, about wild species, information that is essential to evaluate the conservation of genetic diversity. 7, it is necessary to increase the indicators that report for the sustainable use of wild species for now. So there is information on species and quantities used, but not whether they are used in the sustainable way or not. For this, it is essential to have population information on the species of use. And Colombia has a list of invasive alien species. This is a categorization on invasion risk and record for some invasive species in our systems. So these are useful tools to guide the monitoring about these invasive alien species. Sorry? Okay. However, it is required that the country implement a monitoring information system about these invasive exotic species as well. The agricultural sector reports important data on the use of pesticides. However, toxicity and other indicators are required for evaluating the impact of pollution levels on biodiversity. And finally, it is necessary to advance to the measure about measures of carbon reserve in non-forest ecosystems, such as moors, wetlands, savannas, as well as in their understanding of climate change on distribution of species and function of ecosystems. And for this, the compass, that is our white paper for climate action, moves in that direction. So we have facing a lot of opportunities, but we are also facing significant barriers due to the overabundance of information in certain regions and poor or non-existent data in other regions. So this imbalance in information not only limits the comprehensive understanding of a biodiversity, but also affects policy planning. And one important thing, that is resource allocation. So the areas that lack of data tend to be neglected in conservation strategies. So these exacerbate problems of biodiversity loss in the less monitoring regions. So yes, I want to finish here because in terms of time.
Yeah, on that note, I do want to say that if any of our speakers have another time commitment, we are at time, so feel free to drop off. But if we have time for maybe one more question, I think we're happy to stay on until maybe 10 after, if our speakers have time for that. Seems like yes, maybe. Okay. So I'll just ask one more question. So to kind of build off of some of these challenges that you just mentioned, AI has been a very popular topic of conversation, especially with this wave of generative AI tools that are being developed. So in your opinions, what are the biggest risks and benefits to involving AI in either the monitoring or tracking or analyzing of biodiversity, specifically for the purpose of policy design? And then what are some of the primary barriers to adopting these AI tools, specifically in Colombia?
I'll tackle that. As a researcher, I love AI. I cannot wait to have a model that works like Merlin, but in Colombia, where we can do acoustic monitoring of all the birds and the frogs. Right now, we're really bad with the amphibians and the insects. It would be fantastic if we ever get there. And I am definitely going to be trying to push my students to learning and try to work on that as a scientific frontier, especially because my lab is here in the Bay Area. Barriers, privacy issues, who owns the data, data sovereignty, a lot of, for example, indigenous peoples are very resistant to this methodology because they don't want to give the data of their to like a private company, for example. So there's still a lot that we need to kind of iron in terms of governing AI and how safe it will be. And then, of course, the people, like you have no idea how many of the camera trap images that we get are people like walking their dog. And so it's like, how do we filter out and keep all that privacy concern? I think that's a big deal, not just in Colombia, that's a big deal globally on how AI is advancing at a pace where I feel like the policy and how to use AI safely is not at the same pace. Like I'm teaching, for example, and I'm like, how am I gonna include this in my assignments? My students are using it at a faster pace that I can regulate what should be and should not be done in class. So I feel like that's the problem for governments, like how to how to adopt it for all the benefits, but how to mitigate the problems concerned with data privacy. In Colombia, we still have lots of illicit activity. So what if AI finds like more coca or poachers, and what are we going to do with that? So lots of issues about ethics, I would say.
Yes, in this, from my side, AI can play a crucial role in protecting and conserving our environment. Of course, there is an intensive effort that is still needed to determine how best to apply those tools. But at the Institute, we are using AI tools for example, strengthen the information system on biodiversity, for database analysis, identifying patterns, segment potential partners, also for facilitate and improve the workflow between biological collection and information systems, data validation and quality, etc. And also for modeling the geographic distribution of biodiversity. In that we have some projects with some international institutions, and they provide all the tools to create these our platforms, our public platforms that we told you that are biomodelos and biotableros, to respond these questions about species distribution models. And also we are using AI, for example, for analysis of genetic data, and also in participatory science. As Alejandra says, it's not easy, but all these data help us to generate more knowledge and produce more knowledge. And we are encouraging communities for the using of applications such as iNaturalist, Merlin, and also we collect most of the sounds that Merlin use in their app, and etc. And also in photo trapping bring a lot of information about different species, different than mammals, that we have also that help us to include more small population size, where that it was difficult in the past to study until camera trapping made it possible for reduce the impact of human presence to achieve photographic records, etc. So in a complex country, in terms of violence of Colombia, the use of AI of photo trapping has been very useful to know more and better the territories.
Thank you so much for both of your insights. I will, considering we're almost at our new overtime time, I will go ahead and conclude here. And Felipe, if you have any concluding remarks, feel free to jump in. But otherwise, thank you so much for your insights. This was a really great colloquium talk, and we're glad that you were able to join us.
Yeah, I just want to add to the thank you. Thank you to the speakers. Thank you to the moderators. Thank you to everyone who made the organization of the colloquium possible. And we hope to see all of you in some other occasion. IMU is going to continue doing activities like this. So in case you're interested, whether in the colloquium series or in the working groups or in the conference, feel free to reach out, and have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day.